to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by Emmy award-winning investigative journalists, Earthfiles reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe, and world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters incident, John Burroughs. And now, leading off tonight's program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
On Saturday morning, January 13th, 2018, at 8:07 a.m. in Hawaii, cell phones blared a terrifying alert. Quote, "Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill." Close quote. Then across TV and radio networks came an emergency alert. Quote, "If you are outdoors, seek immediate shelter in a building. Remain indoors, well away from windows. If you are driving, pull safely to the side of the road and seek shelter." Close quote. During the next 38 minutes, parents even tried to put young children down storm drains in the street. U.S. PGA Tour golfer John Peterson tweeted, quote, "I'm under mattresses in the bathtub with my wife, baby, and in-laws. Please, Lord, let this bomb threat not be real." Close quote. And after 38 minutes, the missile warning was canceled as human computer error. But Hawaii's governor, David Ige, said nothing for 5 whole hours. And then he apologized for the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency's human mistake, described as, quote, "a veteran agency employee picking the wrong option on his computer for a routine drill and then confirming his wrong choice," close quote. The New York Times reported that the Hawaii emergency management employee who set off the panic was temporarily reassigned, but there are no plans to fire him or identify him publicly. TV news began to run interviews with lots of Hawaiian residents, most saying the same thing. "I didn't know what I was supposed to do or where to go. Americans are clearly not prepared for nuclear attacks." Then, 3 days later, on Tuesday, January 16th, another false missile alarm was set off, and this time it was in Japan. It happened when Japan's main broadcaster, NHK, sent out a news alert that North Korea had launched a nuclear missile and that Japanese citizens should take shelter. However, 5 minutes later, an NHK spokesperson apologized and said that its J-Alert government warning system was not to blame. Instead, like the Hawaii situation 3 days earlier, NHK said it was their own, quote, "staff that had mistakenly operated the equipment to deliver news alerts over the internet," close quote. Back in Hawaii, the Hawaiian Emergency Management Agency confirmed there was a menu that included a button labeled drill compared to one for live alert. The longtime HEMA employee clicked on a computer, quote, "pop-up message," asking whether the employee was sure he wanted to send the alert. And he confirmed that he did, close quote. On January 16, 2018, the New York Times headlined, "What Nuclear Experts Are Afraid of." Quote, "Hawaii false alarm hints at thin line between mishap and nuclear war." Other media were saying Hawaii's missile scare reminds us how precarious the nuclear age is. Is it really possible in this near middle of the 21st century to kick off a deadly nuclear war by accident? U.S. President Donald Trump has tweeted insults to North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, who has tweeted insults back to Trump, calling him, quote, "the bark of a rabid dog and a spasm of a lunatic," close quote, and threatening to attack the United States with a nuclear ballistic missile. After this short break, joining John and me to help us all understand how dangerously possible an accidental nuclear war could happen now is Scott Portzline, chairman of the 3 Mile Island Alert Security Committee in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Scott also investigates nuclear power safety issues and lost and stolen nuclear materials in the United States. First, tonight, Scott is here to help all Americans understand some answers to what those Hawaiian residents kept saying on radio and TV news, that they did not know what to do or where to go. And Scott has current maps of what damage various size nuclear bombs can do to places like Hawaii or San Francisco. And then there is the additional question of what electromagnetic pulses from nuclear airbursts can do to the entire electric grid. And then there are also darker questions about terrorist cyber attacks that the Pentagon is now saying they would like to retaliate against with nuclear weapons. And then there is also the issue of sabotage dangers in our nuclear power plants. We'll be back in a minute after this break.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live exclusively on KGRA-DB, the Global Radio Alliance. Tonight's special guest, Scott Portzline, will join the show right after these messages.
I'm a planner. Some of my friends say I'm a survivalist. I guess they're right, because when disaster hits, I have a survival plan, and it starts with my survivalist camp, my fully functional, off-the-grid bug-out house. And when the you-know-what hits the fan, I'm out of here. So what the heck is a survivalist camp? At first glance, it looks like a very nice RV, but it's really engineered to provide my family with 5 basic needs for survival: air, water, shelter, heat, and food. Survivalist Camps builds a camp to withstand all that nature and man can throw at it. It's fully mobile. My family and I can flee disaster fully self-sufficient in just moments, and its construction will last a lifetime. Look, if you're a planner, you need to check out survivalistcamps.com. They're like you and me. They believe a good plan is the best way to meet a disaster. Survivalistcamps.com. Be ready to be impressed. That's survivalistcamps.com. Get prepared at survivalistcamps.com.
Luis Elizondo is making headlines around the world. He can be seen on every major news network because he disclosed that he's been working on a secret UFO program with the Department of Defense. And he wants to address the UFO community, who he says inspired him to release this information. And you can only hear this at the 2018 International UFO Congress. Tickets are going fast for the 2018 International UFO Congress. Get yours at UFOcongress.com. Linda Howe, Steve Bassett, Don Schmidt, and Michael Carter are just a few names you may recognize. However, the UFO Congress is also famous for bringing new, exciting UFO information to our attendees. Find out more about the incredible lineup we have put together at UFOcongress.com. The UFO Congress is in February 2018 in the beautiful desert outside of Mountain Hills, Arizona. We look forward to seeing you there. Get your tickets at UFOcongress.com.
Hi, this is AJ.
And this is Eve, and we're the hosts of Soul Wanderings, a weekly show dedicated to raising spiritual awareness and fostering connections through shared stories and personal experiences.
Each Wednesday, 7 to 8 Eastern Standard Time here on KGRA. We welcome you to wander with us as we get to know our guests, hear about their trials and triumphs which have led them to their passion-driven purpose. We are excited to be a part of the new lineup, and we look forward to Soul Wandering with all of you here on your official contact for the best in alternative talk radio, KGRAradio.com.
Your contact for current news and trending topics, KGRAradio.com.
You're locked in to Phenomenon Radio Live right here on KGRAradio.com. It's time for tonight's interview with our very special and honored guest, Scott Portzline. To begin tonight's interview, here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
Thanks, Race. And Scott Portzline, welcome to Phenomenon Radio. John and I are so happy to have you here on this important issue. And I wonder if we could start tonight with those many people in Hawaii. And we heard them on CNN and MSNBC and Fox and many different stations, all saying basically the same angst. I didn't know what to do or where to go. And I wondered, Scott, what would you say to U.S. PGA golfer John Peterson when he said that he was in a bathtub and that he was with his wife and baby and in-laws under mattresses?
Well, he was taking actions that a person would take during a tornado. I don't know where his bathroom is located, but one thing you definitely need to do during a incoming nuclear missile warning is to get underground or in the basement of your home if that's the only thing that's available to you. He was right there.
Yeah, why is that, Scott?
Well, you're trying to get some shielding between you and the initial gamma radiation burst and the heat burst, the thermal radiation that can burn people for miles. That's a huge problem. And you also need to be protected from the blast pressure, the shock wave itself. So another thing, you don't want to be near any windows for two reasons. You don't want to be looking out the window because you could become blinded by the flash for the rest of your life. And you want to stay away from any flying glass. Of course, that's why he's covered himself with the mattresses for any type of glass or missiles, as is commonly termed, meaning debris that's flying through the air becomes a missile.
And outdoors, is it fair to say that being outdoors anytime is really dangerous, that's probably going to end up getting you killed if you're anywhere near where a blast would occur?
Yeah, your chances of being a fatality go up dramatically, and of getting cancer if you're close to the site of the blast, very high. But even the burns, we'll talk about the size of nuclear bombs and the burn effects, how far they reach. You could have third-degree burns several miles away from the blast. You do not want to be outside. Some shielding is better than none. So let's talk about how the Hawaiian Emergency Management Center, I just noticed this, didn't even talk about going underground. It just said to take cover indoors. Now, if our government doesn't tell people specifically what to do, how are people supposed to know unless they take the time to do the research?
Yeah, and Scott, isn't it true that one of the impulses of all parents everywhere is to go to the school where their children are? And that then puts everybody at risk because it's the parents outdoors going for the children and the children waiting for the parents to take them.
Yeah, and that, of course, will create such a delay and tie up the highways that you will now have thousands of additional people who haven't taken cover and will become a great burden to the government, let alone to say that they've died or that they've sustained terrible injuries. But the point of the object of the government trying to protect us is to educate us so that an informed citizenry becomes less reliant upon the government when these things take place. And if the government doesn't do a good job of educating us and telling us to have a plan and then have the courage to stick to your plan, such as become trustworthy of your school to take care of your children. Well, that's a huge leap, especially a mother who wants to rescue her children or be with her children during such a scary event as an incoming missile. So the odds are they will have a great deal of trouble sticking to their plan to trust the schools unless they've interacted with their schools, that the school has demonstrated knowledge and shown the parents, the shelter that exists in the basement of the school. Like when I was in first grade, we had drills, and they were quite frightening, actually, to my psyche. I don't remember them being scary as they happened, but we all understood that if we were to ever see a bright flash outside the window, and I went to a school that was 20 miles from the Mechanicsburg Naval Base, which is a huge, important naval facility outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where they actually house nuclear reactors for vessels, submarines, and nuclear aircraft carriers, that sort of thing. That's supposedly top secret, but it seems like everybody knows it, especially when I can see those going down the railroad lines on special cars when they bring them in from Westinghouse out in Pittsburgh. But anyway, we were taught that if you were to ever see this flash, that you immediately needed to get under your desk and duck and cover. And we were trying to protect ourselves from the flying glass and debris that would occur. So we understood that, and we understood that there'd be other times when we would have a warning and we would all go to the basement. And I was just thinking about this again today. They took these drills we had were not for the entire school. It was just one grade at a time. So you had in our school about 30 children participating in a drill in a space that would have trouble holding all 6 grades and 4 or 5 kindergarten classes, where you have over 200 students. So I don't even think the school had thought that through, or our parents had thought that through. And that's the type of thing that needs to be straightened out beforehand, because if you're going to get those mothers and fathers to resist going to the school building and taking shelter for themselves, then they have to become absolutely convinced that's the best plan.
And we don't have any exercises or tests in the United States, which seems to be increasingly important just to get people more prepared. And this goes to the heart of another huge issue, Scott, and that is the iPhone, iPad, the electronic gadgets. Everyone is going to want to call schools, call their loved ones, and depending upon whether we're dealing with a blast with a lot of heat on the ground or an electromagnetic pulse in the air, can you tell people about what is the best thing everybody should do in terms of protecting their iPhones, iPads all of the time in case there could be such a terrible incident?
Sure. For those people who plan ahead of time, who aren't in the dark about preparations and what your needs are going to be and what human behavior just dictates. And that would be to communicate with somebody in your family. I'm taking shelter at so-and-so place as our family plan has determined would be best for me. Are you taking shelter yourself? And do you know this is happening? That's just human nature. So now you need to get off of your cell phone at some point, and I would do it after 1 or 2 phone calls, and put that cell phone in a Faraday cage, or a Faraday bag is another way to express it. Now, what is a Faraday cage or a bag? It protects electronics from the electromagnetic pulse that's created during a nuclear blast. That pulse is blasted out in a billionth of a second. And so normal surge protection equipment cannot protect the electronics because it happens much faster. This EMP propagates much faster than the switches can operate or the fusing can operate in your surge protection. So you've got to put your radio, which is going to be your main communications center, if it's still working, the broadcaster is still working, to hear instructions from civil defense and emergency management agencies. And you're going to have to put your cell phone in there and any other electronics that you value. So after the blast takes place, you're going to wait a little while, and then you can pull those out again. Why wait a little while? Because there may be a second blast. Many countries have targeted certain cities with up to 10 nuclear bombs. So one nuclear blast may not be the end of it. That's the sad fact. I mean, this is troubling have to talk about this type of thing as possibly becoming a reality. I went through this as a young kid, and I remember having the nightmares. I remember one night there was a loud noise in the bedroom, and in my dream, I was at my grade school. And when this loud noise that actually happened in my bedroom, it startled me, and my dream changed to a nuclear bomb had gone off. So all of this affects the psyche of our families, in old or young. It's sad, very, very sad.
And Scott, isn't this whole issue of trying to get underground? There may be a neighborhood where maybe one or two houses have basements and others do not, or people are in apartments and there's a city building that has a basement. What about this question of staying where you are versus trying to go to some place that you know has an underground?
Well, that should all be determined beforehand. And so if you're not prepared and you don't have a basement, you're going to be going outside asking your neighbor if you can stay at their place. Or let's say that you've actually have an agreement in your neighborhood. People will see you, see other people running towards this safe house, and they're going to want to be in there too. And it becomes a Twilight Zone episode, The Shelter, where people were breaking down the doors to get in, and they're all looking at each other saying, what have we become, when they realized that it was a false alarm. So you need to get underground, and you better do something about that with your family plan. I want to get back to the Faraday cage. You can buy for less than $10 a Faraday bag. And there's different sizes, and you can, what I plan is to have, and I have one, it's a metal trash can, an outdoor type trash can with a lid that seals around the top just by pressing down on it, hard press. And you can get those at the hardware store for about $12 and put all your electronics in there. And then that also becomes a container for water or whatever you need to carry with you, possibly, a carriage bucket. So that's a simple answer to a very, very vital issue: communications. Communications is going to be disrupted, but at some point you will have communications again if you've taken care of your electronic equipment, and then you will have better information on what your options are and how to act, how to respond.
And Scott, if you're in a house, an apartment building where there is running water, is it true that if there has been an explosion somewhere far enough away where you are not dead and you are not burning up on your skin, but that what you must do is try to run water on your whole body from your head down for 20 minutes, and then the question about whether it is effective, if you've got thick gaffer tape, to gaffer inside wherever there are windows to seal them off. Can you talk about all that?
Yes. One thing that you're going to be protecting yourself against is fallout. And so we're going to talk in details a little bit later about fallout, what that is, how long it lasts, and the dangers to the human cells. And then we're going to talk about symptoms of radiation illnesses. But if you were caught outdoors, you will have particulate matter come down, radioactive particulates, land on your skin, land on your clothing, and you need to get away from that. So you're going to have to take off your clothing and bury it. Burning it won't do it. That just releases it again. You want to bury it underground, and you want to take a shower for at least 20 minutes. I would plan on taking several showers, and that you have options again. That shower can be outside or it can be inside. Both of them come with a little bit of a price. If you are washing radioactive particulate matter down your drain, some of that will remain in the drain. That would be the choice I would make, because I don't want to be outside during the fallout. You can't, unless you have a Geiger counter, a radiation detector. You don't know how much radiation is coming down in the fallout.
Yeah. And in terms of what we have heard the government, at least, a few years ago, people were joking when they were talking about gaffer taping up windows. But it's my understanding that if you prepare in your plan to have, let's say, a whole box of thick gaffer type tape, if you do seal up the windows, even get some kind of have on store plastic where you could gaffer tape up plastic over all windows, it would help keep radioactive atmosphere and dust out.
Oh, definitely. And I already have my plastic sheeting cut. So all I have to do is I'm using duct tape and put that up. And that'll prevent that little bit of seepage, because our homes aren't perfectly sealed. In fact, it's not really a good idea that they be that way. There's chemicals within your home carpet and other products that release small amounts of formaldehyde or other chemicals. And so you want that air exchange happening in your house. Well, not during a radiation event, whether that be a dirty bomb, a nuclear accident like here at 3 Mile Island, or a nuclear blast. You want to put up the plastic sheeting. Now, here's the options again and the problem. If you put up that sheeting before the blast takes place and the windows shatter, now you have shards going right through the plastic and cutting holes in it. Do you have more plastic on hand ready to put that back up? Well, that would be what you need to prepare for if you put that up in advance.
Yeah. Now, what about these nuke maps? Scott has introduced me to a new and valuable website. It is NUKEMAP, Nuke Map. And Scott, could you go over this with our general audience, starting with the fact that they are entering a yield of 150 kilotons, and they explain why. Because North Korea weapons tested in 2017, they think was about 150 kilotons. And you and I have talked about weapons that the United States and a few others might have that would go all the way up to 30 megatons. But if we start with you explaining, if there was a blast, let's say, over Oahu, where Honolulu is, what would 150 kilotons do in terms of immediate death, and then the miles going out, and at each level going out, what would be happening?
Okay. Should I give the URL for the site, the maps?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can find these fabulous maps, and the interaction with them gives you many choices where you can enter any spot in the world, any city where you live, the town, etc., Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and it will also give you the choices of the size of the bomb, and then we'll go over some other parameters that you can put in. The URL is nuclearsecrecy.com/nuke map, which is NUKEMAP, as you said. nuclearsecrecy.com/nuke map. And I urge everybody to do this for two reasons. One, it's very interesting information. And two, it's very vital information. And when you see the destruction, even with a smaller nuclear bomb, it will probably motivate you to come up with the family plan and remind your coworkers and relatives and neighbors that they ought to be doing the same thing. Because if you have a plan and your neighbor doesn't, your neighbor may be a burden to you when you're fighting for your life or for your family's life. So again, education is key. Well, what I did, and I'll describe it because I was on a different city when you asked about Honolulu.
Right.
At the top of the map, the first thing that we enter in is what city or what location. So I entered Honolulu, Hawaii. I just entered Honolulu, and it took me there. The second step, it asks you to enter the size of the bomb. You're using the term enter a yield in kilotons. And it has some presets, which really makes it very neat because most people don't have any idea of what numbers to enter. So it'll give you a whole list of different nuclear weapons that have been used in testing, or missiles from nuclear weapons and missiles from around the world, whether it's a Pakistani bomb, a North Korean bomb, or the latest one, the estimate of the size that is, to what's on our cruise missiles, which happens to be the same size as the latest North Korean nuclear test, 150 kilotons, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see the Soviet missiles. And so we're going to enter 150 kilotons, and that comes under the latest size for the North Korean. And let me have to change this one. There it is. Change it to North Korean. And then it'll ask you, do you want this to be an air burst or a surface burst? Well, most advanced nations, especially with the missile, are using an air burst because it increases the effectiveness of the bomb. A surface burst would be from somebody smuggling something in a shipping container, that sort of thing. We'll talk about that later also.
Like a suitcase nuke.
Yeah, or something that's a little bit bigger than suitcase nuke, but fits in a cargo shipping container. For instance, North Korea, there's some photographs, if we're to believe it, and I do, shows something called the peanut shell. It's a configuration of a thermonuclear weapon, which means a hydrogen bomb. It's a 2-stage bomb, and it would easily fit into a shipping container. I guess I would describe it as a small compact car.
Good Lord. Well, now let's continue with the nuke map. Honolulu. I'm looking at this color map.
Yes.
And Honolulu, Scott, it looks like the city is destroyed.
Yeah. Downtown Honolulu will be totally flattened, and most of the rest of the some of it will be vaporized, frankly. And then the rest of Honolulu will be, at best, some of the buildings will remain standing, but on fire for sure. And with this map, I have it right now where I see 4 different circles, and they're color coded. The largest circle showing the thermal radiation, and if you know a little bit about Honolulu, there's the Honolulu International Airport, and then the famous Diamond Head mountain peak right there on the coast. Everything in between there has been burned up by this thermal radiation during the burst. Well, let's go back to the center again. The fireball itself, the initial nuclear fireball, is 0.56 miles wide, half a mile wide, and that's going to vaporize and incinerate everything. There will be nothing there. And then the radiation, gamma bursts and X-rays and so forth, are so intense that 50% of the people who are exposed to that will die within several hours to several weeks. That zone is 1.25 miles, the radiation blast. So then we look a little bit, and that's, a third of Honolulu right there. And then we look at the air blast. The air blast, the standard we use for being able to knock down a wall, is a 5 pound per square inch overpressure. Think about 1 foot, how many square inches there are. 144. 144 times 5, it would be almost 600 that's 700 pounds for 1 foot, 1 square foot. Well, you can easily see where you basically have a tractor trailer hitting a wall with a 5 pounds per square inch overpressure. The air blast zone is 4 2/3 miles wide. So if you're on the ground floor of your house compared to being in the basement, there's a greater chance of you being injured, your eardrums broken, and just terrible things can happen if you're not properly protected from the air blast itself. And that air blast is going to take a few seconds to get to you, depending where you are. Now, if you're farther away and behind some of the mountainous regions that are near Honolulu, but still within the range of these circles that are showing up on the map, and you can go there and see what I'm talking about, you'll have some shielding from the direct radiation, the fireball. The fireball wouldn't go that far with that size nuclear bomb. And you'll have some from the air blast. Now, thermal radiation, which is so powerful that it'll give people 3rd-degree burns. And in fact, it can burn so the penetration can be so bad through ultraviolet rays that are generated during the blast, that it'll destroy the pain nerves in your skin. And so you may have third-degree burns, but very little pain. You may not even be aware of how, you hear people getting shot and they say, I didn't even know I was shot. And, somebody has to tell them you're bleeding from your leg or whatever. Well, the same thing can happen here. You may not know that you need to seek burn treatments on your back because maybe your back was facing a blast.
So, Scott, there are two categories here. There is the radiation itself, which we should talk about that graph that you sent me about the showing that the decay of the dose of radiation from fallout from the intense first burst down. And that also relates to the question of how far do you have to be away from this center blast for two things. One, to not die from radiation nearly immediately, and two, that the thermal blast, the heat, it's the heat that is going to go through the nerves in the skin and burn people down to their bone. And what are the distances from the center of the blast? Where do you finally get out of that thermal and radiation destruction?
Well, in this particular case, using the 150 kiloton weapon and then using the map at Honolulu, it's 6.5 miles wide. So you have to be, 3.25 miles away from the center of the blast. But of course, that's an unknown. Somebody may have targeted an airburst over Honolulu and they missed by 3 miles. So unfortunately, that is one of the chances and risk we take. You may shelter right over, the bomb may hit right over top of you and you don't stand a chance. On the other hand, you may get lucky and be outside the area completely. And it's just something we can't control. And we don't know what size the yield will actually be. So there's really no good advice I can give you on how far away to go because it's a total unknown.
Well, can you talk about this decline, the decay of the dose rate that has this graph at the 0? It's terrible. And then what happens?
Yes. Very rapidly, the fallout begins to decay. So tying this back into sheltering, there's really two types of sheltering we're concerned about. And one is the effects of the immediate blast, the initial effects that happen in the first few seconds, that type of sheltering. And then there's the fallout sheltering. And so the fallout sheltering has to go on for at least a day and probably a couple of days. I don't really trust the government to tell us how safe or unsafe areas will be because, first of all, they're not going to have all of the monitoring equipment that they would really like to have, and they can't tell you. And in the long term, they're going to tell you an area is safe when it's subjective to long-term cancer exposures. And I've already seen how they've changed that documents on that with dirty bombs, where what standards they wanted to have, and they finally realized, well, we'll bankrupt ourselves if we try to clean up a city to that degree. Let's just lie to the people and tell them it's safe after we get as much out that we can reasonably afford.
Wow.
So anyway, that goes to the trust. Now let's get back to the specifics of what happens to fallout, the decay, and why fallout is dangerous. Fallout is particulate matter containing radioactivity. Radioactivity harms the human body by destroying cells. And if you destroy cells within the body, ultimately you can destroy organs in the brains. And initially you're going to destroy things like your stomach lining, and that's what causes the nausea. And we'll get to those symptoms here in a couple minutes. And if you have cells dying at normal body rates, our bodies can cope with that and gets rid of waste and destroyed cells, defective cells on a regular basis, although some of those defective cells can grow into cancers. The problem is during a nuclear event, you're going to have so many cells dying that infections will set up. Your body can't cope with the enormous billion cells being damaged rather than just thousands that occur every day. So what happens? The radionuclides fall down onto your clothing, onto your skin, onto the ground around you, onto the vegetation, onto your crops, onto the animals and so forth. And you don't want to have anything to do with that for the first day especially. About 160 nuclides will still be radioactive after 1 hour. The blast will create hundreds of different radionuclides, but after an hour, there's only about 160 only. When the fallout particles are heavy enough to fall a few hours after the detonation, it'll be reduced down to about 80 different nuclides, having a life range of less than 1 second to over 30 years. And then there's still some radionuclides with a 7-day half-life that disappear in about 8 to 10 weeks when they decay and become stable. But there are about 20 radionuclides in fallout that have a half-life of more than 7 days. And these constitute the long-term contamination, like strontium, thorium, uranium, and of course plutonium. And that can be found, for instance, in Las Vegas, on the site, the testing site, and off-site, and even in communities at a very small levels, slightly above background radiation. And some people blame that for some of the long-term cancers. So if you have sensitive radiation detectors, you can find radiation on the ground from fallout of those tests. During the 60s, Rochester, New York, and I've been there, which is this is a funny story. I remember my family taking a tour of the Kodak film plant when there used to be film and no digital cameras, and how you take a tour in the dark of an industry. I'll never get that, but all I remember is looking down at the little green lights on the floor so you knew where to step, and there is almost nothing else to see. Anyway, what happened in Rochester in the 60s at Kodak, and they sued the government, was the film was destroyed by radioactive fallout following one of the tests in Nevada. That's how far dangerous amounts of radioactivity have drifted from the test sites. It's what led to the world deciding we can no longer have atmospheric nuclear testing. We're killing ourselves just trying to test these things.
And Scott, isn't it important for people to understand Hawaii has been in the news because that is the closest U.S. land body, even though it's far out in the Pacific, that it is alleged North Korea could reach with 150 kiloton possibly. If they got all the way to the West Coast, and if there was a big airburst, that radiation is going to be carried west to east over the entire North America.
Yes, in small amounts. And again, it may take 3 days or longer to reach the East Coast. A lot of those radionuclides will have decayed, and it'll be smaller and smaller amount of dangers. But a larger burst, again, much more dangerous. I'm looking at the map now because, there's an interest. If you've ever seen flight paths from, say, Chicago to Korea, they end up flying over the Alaskan Aleutian Islands because that's the shortest route. It's actually a straight line on a globe. It doesn't look that way when you look at a flattened map. But for North Korea, part of Alaska would actually be closer than Hawaii. However, there's nothing there. There's nothing in, when I say nothing, there are some things, but there's hardly a thing in the Alaskan chain, except for some radars that look into the former Soviet Union to see if any missiles are coming.
Yeah. And coming to that question that I posed in the intro tonight, could a nuclear horror like what we are talking about with just the 150 kiloton, we aren't even talking about what would happen with 30 megatons. This is 150 kiloton that they think North Korea has. Is it really possible, Scott, that this could get started by computer error, an accident, And you told me about one that was astounding that occurred back about 30 or 40 years ago that shows how accidents could happen.
Yes. Are you talking about the Thule, Greenland event?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that one blows my mind too. I was in Thule, Greenland in 1979, and if you were to go there at that time, you would have seen 4 enormous radar screens that looked over the North Pole to watch for incoming missiles. It was part of the early defensive early warning system, the DEW line, that stretched from Greenland through northern Canada the whole way to Alaska. And they had been constructing these in the late 50s and became active. And I think in the end of 59, certainly by 1960. So on October 5th in 1960, NORAD, that's the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Notice it says North American, not just American or the U.S., because of involving Canada and Greenland. Greenland was once part of Denmark, but it gained their independence in 1979 while I was there. That'll lead me to another story we can come up with later in this interview. But what happened on the 5th of October was the radar screens saw missiles, a huge missile barrage coming from the Soviet Union, and the computers calculated the accuracy of this alert as being 99.9% certain. That's enough to make anybody want to push the button. But fortunately, and I don't know the details of this, and I would like to know, very rapidly, the military authorities were able to determine that this was a mistake. It turned out that the radar was bouncing off the moon, which had just arisen over the horizon and was viewed as the computer as incoming Soviet missiles.
It's just incredible. And that there have been since then, there have been other possible potential accidents. And that goes to the heart of this whole issue. Do you think, literally, could we end up in a nuclear war by accident today?
Oh, absolutely. Very easily, I think, because we have heightened nerves of the nations. We have some leaders who are very competitive and a lot of bravado. And when you look at how many things have already occurred, dozens of incidents of close calls and mishaps that fortunately were halted because of some other human interaction and double checking somehow. And they don't always reveal how these are averted because they probably don't want somebody to know how to overcome that too, because in today's world with cyber attacks, that could definitely be an issue. It's going to happen someday. If we don't get our missiles off hair trigger alert along with the rest of the world, we're asking for troubles. So we have missiles that can be launched within about 10 minutes. And there is a switch at every land-based missile base, intercontinental missile base in the United States, where you can take each missile off hair trigger alert. And we should do that because we need a little bit of time in these tough days. But the military sees it the opposite. Let's protect ourselves with mutually assured destruction and keep them on hair trigger alert, because if we don't launch right away, then those missiles will get destroyed and we won't have any retaliation.
Well, and what is your reaction to these new headlines just in the past few days? Here's one right in the New York Times. Quote, Pentagon suggests countering devastating cyber attacks with nuclear arms.
Yeah, my reaction will put me down as being hated by some of my anti-nuclear power compatriots. I think it's necessary. We have to threaten people with mutually assured destruction when you think about the powers that they have now with cyber attacks. That definitely has leveled the playing field where we can, hackers, doesn't even have to be a nation, but military grade hacking can bring a nation to its knees. And North Korea is pretty good at doing that. And so when I see these false alerts come up, it makes me wonder, was that a hack? There was another one earlier in Japan, I guess it was August of last year, where citizens woke up early in the morning to a text message saying that a missile was on its way into Japan. Well, North Korea had just launched a missile 4 minutes earlier, but I don't think they were able to determine where it was going to go. They did know that it came down in the Sea of Japan, so that's a frightening thing. Well, that's the type of thing that leads to nuclear war.
And these two, we'll call them false alarms because that's the way they're being described, Hawaii and Japan, 3 days apart. Do you think there's any possibility that behind both of them happening within 3 days could be somebody with the intent of either one, seeing what would happen, or two, doing it maliciously?
Yeah, yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities. We had experiments over St. Louis, Missouri in the 60s with sonic booms. I don't know if you ever heard of that test. Or it was an experiment from the CIA to see what happens to a group of people who hear these sonic booms and have their storefront windows broken every now and then. How will they react, and will it cause nervous conditions and so forth? I actually don't know the outcome of it, but it didn't take too long for them to stop that experiment. It wouldn't surprise me that somebody did this on a Saturday, because we disrupt businesses the least, and work, going into office and so forth, and see what they do for their home protection. If they put that out there as an experiment, how would the civilians respond? Well, they know now that they'll do stupid things like get underground by putting their children in sewer lines, which is a huge mistake because the sewer gases could have killed those children. There's not always deadly amounts of gases in sewers, but there's hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, methane, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and more. So when you put your children, especially children, into a sewer like that, you may have just sentenced them to death because you didn't prepare and the government didn't prepare. So the government's web pages should say, seek underground shelter, but not the sewers, and explain why. I get angry. I get angry when I see the government. This is how many years after 9/11? 17 years coming up. And I've been after Homeland Security from the second year after 9/11 to have a series of television programs discussing each type of attack or concern, terrorist attack, or even a nuclear attack in a flat out war, to educate the people so that we don't have to rely so much on the government. The government's going to be fighting for themselves, and they're not necessarily going to be telling the truth anyhow. But if you have people who are absolutely panicked, you're going to have war amongst citizens in the streets, which will happen at the grocery stores and the gas stations anyhow.
And what would you say, quite honestly, because I think that we have to be frank tonight. This is what is missing. Everybody is missing what can be done, should be done. If you are in a house and it has no basement and there's nobody around that has any underground, and there isn't a nuclear shelter because cities haven't been building them, and they're hearing your voice, don't go down into the sewer, and it's the only place people know to get underground. What do you say?
Well, then try to get in a large building, and if it's only your home, then get into the middle of the house and cover yourself up with the mattresses, just like the golfer did, and hope for the best. But don't forget to protect your electronic equipment. I think most people in many places will have more options than that. So definitely research the issue and study it. And why isn't our Homeland Security teaching us these things? There was a program on using seatbelts and car safety in the early 60s, because I remember watching it, and it had a huge audience for this automotive safety, at that time, we were killing lots and lots of people on our highways. And I remember the nation tuning in with almost record numbers to learn how to drive better. Why can't we do the same type of thing for something that's even more important?
Yeah. And today, it's 17 years after 9/11, as you pointed out. And that I'm hearing discussions both among people who are scientists as well as people who email me frustrated that they don't have any real solid information, and that there are a lot of discussions in which the electromagnetic pulse, if it is from the air, is being talked about in many circles as perhaps being more damaging to the whole infrastructure, let's say, of bringing down all of the electricity in the United States. Do you think, and we will pick this up on the other side of the break that's upcoming, but for just this answer, how much of our continental U.S. electric grid would come down from an EMP airburst over L.A. or San Francisco?
Well, half the nation, depending on the size of the weapon, the nuclear weapon, and depending on at what altitude it was detonated. I've seen some things where people or scientists are saying that the dangers are overstated, and then they cite the weapon testing above ground that occurred in Nevada. Yet those testings were done, nuclear testing were done with the average 15 to 20 kilotons, somewhere a little bit larger than that, and from a height at most of 700 feet on the towers, most of them less than that. So they're pointing out that 65 miles away in Las Vegas, people didn't lose their electronics, their radios, and so forth. Well, yeah, but that's a different comparison to a 30 megaton weapon going off in the middle of the nation could take down most of the nation's grid. Now,
Scott, we have to take a break, but let's pick right up on that when we come back. What would a 30 megaton do to the infrastructure of the United States?
This 45-minute uninterrupted segment of Phenomenon Radio is brought to you by OnlineVibes.com, your personal connection to mind, body, and spirit, committed to connecting you with healing modalities that can manifest a true and healthy change in your life. Visit the website at OnlineVibes.com. Stay with us. Scott Portzline will join the show right after these messages. Don't go anywhere.